The room beyond the mirror. It was a cold and dreary evening when Clara first arrived at the Victorian estate known as Hollowbrook Manor. The journey through the fog-cloaked countryside had been unnervingly quiet, and the isolated manor loomed like a shadow against the bruised purple sky. She had inherited the property from her estranged uncle, Victor Blackwell, a man she had only met once as a child. His death was sudden, leaving behind an air of mystery that clung to the estate like ivy. Clara pushed open the massive oak door, which creaked loudly in protest. The entryway was dim, illuminated only by the dying embers of the sun filtering through cracked, stained glass windows. Dust coated every surface, and the faint scent of decay lingered in the air. As she stepped inside, her boots echoed against the stone floors, breaking the oppressive silence. "Welcome, Miss Blackwell," said a voice from the shadows. Startled, Clara turned to see an elderly man emerge. He was thin, with a weathered face and sharp, observant eyes. "I am Gregory, the caretaker. Your uncle left instructions for me to assist you." Clara nodded, unsure of how to respond. Gregory's presence was both reassuring and unsettling. "Has anyone been living here since his passing?" she asked. "No, miss. The manor has been empty, but you may find remnants of his presence. He was a peculiar man." Gregory hesitated, as though weighing his words. "There are places in this house best left undisturbed." Clara frowned, but decided not to press further. She thanked Gregory and ascended the grand staircase to explore the upper floors. The house was a labyrinth of narrow hallways, heavy wooden doors, and rooms filled with antique furniture covered in white sheets. She felt as though the walls were watching her, their intricate carvings forming faces that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. It was in the east wing that Clara found the mirror. The room was smaller than the others, with a single window that overlooked the barren garden. In the center stood a full-length mirror, its ornate frame carved with strange twisting patterns. The glass was flawless, reflecting her image with unnerving clarity, yet there was something about it that made her uneasy. The air around it felt colder, and when she stepped closer, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in its depths. "This must be one of my uncle's treasures," she murmured, running her fingers along the frame. The wood was warm to the touch, almost pulsing beneath her fingertips. Shaking off the strange sensation, she decided to leave the room. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in the mirror that made her heart freeze. It wasn't her reflection. It was the silhouette of a man standing just behind her. Clara spun around, but the room was empty. Her breathing quickened as she stared into the mirror, searching for any sign of what she had seen. The glass now reflected only her pale face, wide-eyed and trembling. "Get a grip, Clara," she muttered, backing out of the room. But as she closed the door, she swore she heard a faint whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The manor groaned and creaked as though alive, and every sound set her nerves on edge. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the mirror and the fleeting figure she had seen. She told herself it was just her imagination, but a deeper part of her knew better. Unable to resist, she lit a candle and crept back to the east wing. The corridor seemed longer in the darkness, the shadows stretching and twisting like living things. When she reached the room, the door was ajar. She didn't remember leaving it that way. The mirror stood where she had left it, its surface gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Clara hesitated before stepping inside. The air felt heavier, pressing against her chest. She approached the mirror cautiously, her reflection flickering in the unsteady light. "What are you?" she whispered. The whisper came again, faint but distinct. It wasn't her imagination this time. The sound was coming from the mirror, heart pounding. Clara leaned closer, and as she did, the surface of the glass rippled like water. Her reflection blurred and dissolved, revealing a dark room beyond the mirror room that wasn't part of the manor. Clara stumbled back, her candle nearly falling from her grasp. The image in the mirror grew clearer, and she saw a man standing in the other room. His back was to her, his head bowed. He was dressed in tattered clothing, his shoulders hunched as though carrying a great burden. Slowly he turned, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. The man had no face. Where his features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin. Yet she felt his gaze heavy and suffocating. The faceless man raised a hand, pressing it against the inside of the glass as though trying to reach her. Clara stumbled backward, her candle flickering wildly. "Leave me alone," she screamed, but the man didn't move. Instead, the mirror's surface began to shimmer again, and the room beyond it darkened. A low, guttural voice emanated from the glass, filling the room with a bone-chilling sound. "You cannot escape." The candle blew out, plunging Clara into darkness. She fled the room, slamming the door behind her. As she ran down the hallway, she heard the sound of glass shattering, followed by heavy footsteps echoing behind her. Clara spent the next day trying to convince herself that she was losing her mind. She avoided the East Wing entirely, staying in the library and poring over old journals and documents left behind by her uncle. Among the papers, she found a leather-bound journal that seemed to belong to Victor himself. The entries were erratic, filled with ramblings about the mirror. "The mirror is a doorway," one entry read, "a threshold to another realm. But it is not a place of wonder, it is a prison, and the things trap their hunger for freedom." Another entry sent chills down her spine. "I made a grave mistake. The mirror should have remained buried. It calls to me in the night, whispering promises of power and knowledge. But I know the truth now. It is a liar, a predator. If anyone finds this journal, do not look into the mirror. Do not let it see you." Clara's hands trembled as she closed the journal. She now understood why Gregory had warned her to leave certain places undisturbed. But it was too late. The mirror had seen her, and she had seen what lay beyond it. That night the whispers returned. They seeped through the walls, growing louder as the hours passed. Clara lay in bed, clutching the journal like a talisman. Then she heard the sound of a door creaking open. She sat up, her heart hammering in her chest. The footsteps came again, slow and deliberate, moving closer to her room. Clara grabbed a lantern and stepped into the hallway, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. The air was ice cold, and her breath came out in visible puffs. She followed the sound, her steps faltering as she realized it was leading her back to the east wing. The door to the mirror room was wide open, and a dim, unnatural light spilled into the hallway. Clara gripped the lantern tightly, her fear warring with a strange compulsion to see what was happening. When she entered the room, the mirror was glowing. The surface rippled like water, and the dark room beyond it was once again visible. The faceless man was gone, but she felt his presence heavy and oppressive. Then, a voice spoke, deep and resonant, echoing in her mind. "Come closer." "No," Clara whispered, shaking her head. "You opened the door," the voice said. "Now you must step through." Clara backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. The room seemed to close in, the walls warping and bending. The mirror's light grew brighter, engulfing her. She screamed as the word tilted, and she was pulled forward, her body passing through the glass as though it were liquid. When Clara opened her eyes, she was in the room beyond the mirror. It was identical to the one she had just left, but everything was wrong. The air was thick and suffocating, and the walls seemed to pulse like living flesh. Shadows moved on their own, and the faceless man stood in the corner, watching her without eyes. "Why am I here?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking. The man tilted his head, his movements unnatural and jerky. "You belong to us now," he said, though his voice didn't come from his mouth. "This is your prison, as it was his." "My uncle?" Clara whispered. The man nodded and stepped aside, revealing another figure in the shadows. It was Victor, his face gaunt and his eyes hollow. He looked at Clara with sorrow and guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought I could control it, but the mirror, it takes and never gives. It's too late for me, but you might still escape." Victor handed her a shard of glass, its edges glowing faintly. "Break the mirror," he said. "Destroy its power." The faceless man let out a guttural roar, and the shadows surged toward Clara. She ran, clutching the shard, as the room twisted and warped around her. The mirror loomed ahead, its surface writhing like a living thing. With all her strength, Clara drove the shard into the glass. The mirror shattered, the pieces exploding outward in a blinding burst of light. Clara woke on the floor of the east wing, surrounded by shards of the broken mirror. The room was silent, the oppressive presence gone. She staggered to her feet, her body trembling. Gregory found her hours later, his face pale as he took in the scene. "It's over," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "The mirror is gone." Gregory nodded solemnly. "You've done what your uncle couldn't. Rest now, Miss Blackwell. You've earned it." But as Clara left the room, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in a shard of glass. For a split second, she thought she saw the faceless man staring back at her, and she wondered if it was truly over.